My name is Stanley Sellers. I'm 71 years old, and last spring my own daughter seated me at the table where the waiters ate. It happened at my granddaughter's wedding. 200 guests filled that ballroom. My daughter leaned close, her breath sharp, and whispered that I was a burden. Then she pointed me toward a table beside the kitchen door. I sat down. I made myself small. I learned one more time how to become invisible in a room filled with my own family. But I did not know that 10 minutes later, the most powerful man there would walk past every wealthy, important guest in that ballroom and bow his head to the old man they had hidden beside the kitchen. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Cream paper, gold lettering, my granddaughter's name printed across the front. Chloe was getting married. I sat at my kitchen table and read the invitation 3 times. My eyes grew wet. That girl used to fall asleep in my workshop with sawdust in her hair, curled up in a pile of wood shavings while I worked. I would have built her a palace if she had asked. Instead, I decided to build her something she could keep. For 3 weeks, I worked in the shop every night. I chose black walnut, the good wood I had been saving for years. I planed it, joined it, and sanded it until the grain looked like flowing water. I built a hope chest. Then I carved her name into the lid, deep and clean, the letters flowing beneath my hands the same way her mother's name once had. It was the finest thing I had ever made. I meant every cut. A hope chest is supposed to begin empty, waiting for a bride to fill it with memories. I decided to give Chloe a head start by placing the first things inside myself. Then I dug out my one good suit, the gray one, and pressed it myself. I polished my shoes twice. I wanted to look like a grandfather Chloe would never be ashamed of. My daughter, Marilyn, called me that week. Her voice sounded tight and clipped, the way it had so often lately. She told me she had handled all the details and said I only needed to show up. Looking back, I should have heard the warning beneath her words. There was something careful and rehearsed in her voice. But I was a happy old man building a chest for his granddaughter, and I was not listening closely enough. I told her I had made Chloe a gift. There was a long pause. "Just bring yourself, Dad," she said. "That's plenty." I did not understand what she meant. I would soon enough. Marilyn called again 2 days before the wedding. This time, there was no warmth in her voice at all. "Dad, we need to go over a few things." I sat down. I could hear her breathing, as though she were gathering herself. "Wear the gray suit, not the brown one. The gray." "I planned on it," I said. "And please don't talk about the workshop. Not to the Ashfords, not to anyone. They don't need to hear about table saws." The Ashfords were Preston's family. Preston was my son-in-law. They had money that went back generations, the kind of family that spent every summer somewhere exclusive. "Marilyn," I said, "I raised you properly. I know how to behave." "That's not what I mean." I heard a sharp breath leave her. "Just please, Dad. Just this once. Don't be you." Those words landed somewhere deep. I held the phone and said nothing. Then I heard a second voice behind her. Preston's voice. Low and smooth. The voice of a man who never raised it because he never had to. "Tell him about the papers, too," Preston said. Marilyn must have covered the phone because everything became muffled for a moment. When she returned, her tone had changed. It sounded brighter, but the brightness was forced. "We'll talk at the wedding, Dad. There's just some paperwork. Nothing to worry about." "What paperwork?" "Nothing. We'll talk later. I have to go." The line went silent. I remained at my kitchen table for a long time after that. Paperwork at a wedding. I turned those words over in my mind, but I could not make them fit anything good. I looked through the window toward my shop. The porch light touched the old sign my wife had painted 40 years earlier. Sellers Woodworks. Whatever Marilyn and Preston wanted, I knew it had something to do with that building. I felt it in my chest before I understood it in my head. The workshop was the heart of everything I had ever built. Not the furniture, the place itself. My wife, Ruth, and I bought it during the year we married. I taught myself the trade inside that building. Then I spent 40 years teaching it to others, mostly boys, the ones nobody else wanted. The kid who had been expelled from school. The one whose father struggled with drinking. The one who showed up with a dark bruise around one eye and no plan for his future. I never charged any of them a dime. Ruth used to say I ran a home for lost boys with lathes. She was not wrong. Some of those boys grew into remarkable men. One became a contractor in the city. Another opened a cabinet shop 2 towns away. One built churches. But there was one boy I remembered more clearly than all the others. He came to me during the winter of 1997. He was maybe 16 years old, sleeping behind the shop where warm air escaped from a heat vent. He had bruises that clearly had not come from an accident, and enough pride to keep him from asking anyone for help. I did not ask questions. I simply left the back door unlocked and placed a sandwich on the workbench. The next morning, the sandwich was gone. The morning after that, the boy was standing near the lathe, silently watching my hands. I taught him everything I knew. Joinery. Finishing. How to read the grain in a piece of wood. How to stand straight and look people in the eye. He had something inside him. A hunger. A need to make something meaningful of himself. He stayed for 4 years. Then one day, he left to make his own way in the world, and I never learned where he landed. I never found out what happened to him. I only hoped the world had become kinder after he found my door. I had no idea I was about to receive my answer. The wedding venue was an hour outside town, at a vineyard resort I had only seen from the highway. I drove my truck. It was a good truck, 20 years old, clean, but noisy. I followed the long driveway past rows of grapevines and a large fountain, and I felt every one of my 71 years. The resort was made of glass and stone. Valets wearing white gloves accepted keys from people driving cars worth more than my house. I parked my truck myself, near the side of the property. Then I walked toward the entrance in my gray suit, carrying the walnut chest in my arms beneath a moving blanket. A young man wearing a headset stopped me at the door. "Deliveries go around back, sir. The service entrance is on the left." He thought I worked there. I looked down at the blanket in my arms and then back at him. He was only a young man doing his job. "I'm here for the wedding," I said. "I'm the bride's grandfather." His face turned red. "Oh, I'm very sorry, sir." He stepped aside. "Right this way." I smiled and did not hold the mistake against him. The truth was, people had mistaken me for a delivery man throughout most of my life. Working hands do that to people. They notice the hands before they notice the man. The ballroom took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung above polished floors. White flowers filled nearly every corner. The floor reflected the light so clearly that it looked like another ceiling beneath our feet. Near the center of the room stood a group of people in expensive clothes. The Ashfords were holding court. Preston stood among them, laughing at something with a glass in his hand. I searched for a place to set down Chloe's chest. Then I looked for the small card with my name so I would know where an old man was supposed to sit. The seating chart stood near the entrance on a gold easel. Names were written in careful calligraphy, table by table. I found the family table first. Table 1. Front and center. It was beside the head table, where Chloe and her new husband would sit. Marilyn and Preston were listed there. So were the Ashford grandparents, Preston's brother and his wife, and 2 aunts I had never met. I read the names twice. Mine was not there. At first, I assumed someone had made a mistake. Things like that happen. At a large wedding, with 100 cards to prepare, somebody misses one. I was not hurt yet. I was only confused. I found a young woman carrying a clipboard near the coat check and approached her as politely as I could. "Excuse me, I'm trying to find my table." "Sellers. Stanley Sellers." She smiled and moved her finger down a printed list. Then her finger stopped. Her smile changed slightly. It became careful. "Sellers? Yes, here you are, sir. You're at table 12. "Table 12? I asked. "Where is that?" She pointed toward the far side of the ballroom, toward the back, toward a pair of swinging doors where waiters carried trays into and out of the kitchen. "Beside the kitchen, sir." I stood there holding my granddaughter's wedding gift as something cold settled inside my stomach. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I'm the bride's grandfather. Her mother is my daughter." The young woman's expression told me everything. She had seen situations like this before. She knew exactly what table 12 represented. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. "This is the arrangement I was given." The arrangement. Not a mistake. Someone had sat down with the seating chart and deliberately decided where I belonged. I turned toward the family table. Marilyn was walking straight toward me, and there was no apology on her face. Table 12 sat 6 feet from the kitchen doors. Every time those doors opened, I heard pans clattering and cooks calling out orders. The tablecloth matched the others, but almost nothing else did. 2 young waiters were already seated there during their break, eating quietly. A dishwasher still wore his apron. A woman who worked at the coat check sat beside him. They were good people, working people, my kind of people. And there I stood in my pressed gray suit, holding a black walnut chest I had poured myself into for 3 weeks. I stood beside the empty chair. I could not make myself sit. Not yet. Sitting would have meant accepting the decision. A few guests at nearby tables glanced toward me. I saw them understand what had happened. The old man beside the kitchen. Then they looked away quickly, the way people do when they see something uncomfortable and prefer not to acknowledge it. This was not an oversight. I understood that now. Somebody had seen my name on a chart and made a choice. The kitchen. The staff table. That was where they believed I belonged. I carefully placed Chloe's chest against the wall. Across the ballroom, Marilyn changed direction and hurried toward me. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she moved between the tables. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes kept moving toward the Ashfords. Checking. Always checking. Who was watching? She reached me and lowered her voice. "Dad, what are you doing standing there? People can see you." "Marilyn, there's been a mix-up. My name is at table 12. It isn't a mix-up." She did not even look at me when she said it. "Just sit down, please." The way she said please told me she was not asking. She was giving an order. "Why here?" I asked quietly. "Just between us. Why am I not sitting with the family?" Marilyn glanced toward the Ashfords again. Then something in her expression hardened. "Because you don't fit with these people, Dad. You know you don't. I'm your father, and this is the most important day of Chloe's life. I'm not going to let you embarrass her." "Embarrass her how?" "By being here." She leaned closer. Her voice became so quiet I nearly missed the words. But I heard them. "I will remember them for as long as I live. You've always been a burden, Dad. My whole life. It was always the workshop. Always the sawdust. Always the man who never fit anywhere nice." Her eyes were wet, but not with sorrow. They were filled with anger. "Just sit here and behave for once. Do it for me." Preston appeared behind her. He rested one hand on her shoulder and looked at me the way a man looks at a problem he believes he has already solved. "Nobody wants to hear about table saws, Stanley," he said calmly. Let's just get through today. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my legs so nobody would notice. I thought about everything. The double shifts. The years I ate cereal for dinner so Marilyn could have new shoes. The college tuition I paid one furniture commission at a time. The nights I stayed awake beside her when she was sick. A burden. That was what I had been to her. I sat down at table 12. I told myself I was doing it for Chloe. It was her wedding day, not mine. An old man's pride was not worth ruining the happiest day of his granddaughter's life. I believed that. I truly did. For about 10 more minutes. From table 12, I had a clear view of the gift table. Silver-wrapped boxes were stacked high. Envelopes were thick with checks. Crystal and fine china had been arranged beneath the lights. My chest was not on the table. It sat on the floor, beside one of the table legs, pushed out of the way as though someone had placed it there and forgotten it. I watched Preston walk toward it. He moved the chest slightly with the front of his shoe. Then he called a server over, pointed toward my gift, and gestured toward the back of the building. The server nodded and bent down to lift it. I was too far away to hear everything, but the ballroom became quiet for a moment, and Preston's voice carried across the room. Take that wooden thing to storage. It doesn't match the decor. The wooden thing, 3 weeks of my life. Black walnut I had saved for a decade. My granddaughter's name carved into the lid by hand. It did not match the decor. I gripped the edge of the table and stayed where I was. I could not move, because I did not know what I would do if I stood. Across the room, near the head table, I saw Chloe in her wedding dress. She was laughing with one of her bridesmaids. She looked radiant, happier than I had ever seen her. She had not looked toward the kitchen. She did not know where I had been seated. Then, for one brief moment, she turned. Her eyes moved across the ballroom and reached table 12. She saw me. Her smile weakened. A small line appeared between her eyebrows. Confusion. A question beginning to form. Then a bridesmaid pulled her attention away, and Chloe disappeared into the crowd. She did not know. I was certain of that. Whatever Marilyn and Preston had planned, my granddaughter had no part in it. Somebody would eventually have to tell her the truth. I simply did not know that the truth would first come from a stranger. The people at table 12 treated me more kindly than my family had all day. The young waiter beside me was named Marcus. He offered me a bread roll from the basket. The coat check woman, Dolores, asked whether I was feeling well, because I had become pale. I'm fine, I told her. It's only been a long day. They spoke easily among themselves and slowly included me in the conversation. Where was I from? Did I have other grandchildren? What had I done before retirement? I worked with wood, I said. Furniture mostly. Cabinets. Whatever people needed. A young waitress named Sophia sat across from me. She placed down her water and studied my hands. Really? She looked closer. You have a craftsman's hands, sir. My grandfather had hands like that. He built boats. I turned my hands over on the white tablecloth. Scared knuckles. A thumbnail that never grew properly, after a chisel slipped in 1985. 40 years of work were written into my skin. For the first time all day, somebody looked at my hands and saw a man instead of a delivery worker. Boats are difficult work, I said. Your grandfather has my respect. Sophia smiled. Then she leaned closer, as though sharing a secret. You know the man who owns this place? Mr. Vance? He started with nothing, too. That's what everybody says. He came from nowhere. He's a kind man. That's unusual for somebody with that much money. Vance. The name moved through me like a cold draft. I did not understand why. I had never known anyone named Vance, yet something old moved in the back of my mind. A shape I could not quite see. I found myself asking her to repeat the name. Vance, Sophia said again. Julian Vance. He owns the company. This resort, 3 others, and a few hotels. He's a very important man. Julian. I became still. The name landed inside my chest like a stone falling into a deep well, sending ripples towards something I could not yet reach. Julian. I had known a Julian once, a very long time ago. But that boy had a different last name, didn't he? Then again, had I ever known his last name at all? He had arrived with nothing. Boys with nothing do not always offer their entire story. No, Julian was a common enough name. I was an old man, searching for meaning during a difficult day. That was all. He's here today? I asked. The owner? Marcus nodded while eating. That's the strange thing. He never attends events. Never. But people say he arrived personally this afternoon. Nobody knows why, Dolores added. They say it must be something important. He cleared his whole schedule. I looked across the enormous ballroom at the family table. Preston was laughing. Marilyn was fixing her lipstick. The Ashfords sat in their expensive clothes, believing that the arrival of a wealthy man would be the most important event of their evening. A powerful man who had come from nothing. A man named Julian. A man who had arrived for a reason nobody understood. I told myself to stop thinking about it. It was a coincidence. Nothing more. The world was filled with men named Julian, and men who had worked their way upward from difficult beginnings. But my heart began to beat faster than it should have, and I could not make it slow down. Then Preston pushed back his chair, straightened his jacket, and walked toward table 12. For the moment, I forgot about Julian Vance. Preston pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat as though he owned it. He placed a leather folder on the table and folded his hands on top. Stanley, he said, let's discuss business while we have a quiet moment. He opened the folder. There was a thick stack of papers with colored markers beside the places requiring signatures. What is this? I asked, although I already knew. The word from Marilyn's phone call returned to me. Paperwork. It's a purchase agreement. He moved the papers toward me. For the workshop property. The land, the building, everything. My firm has a development plan for that block. Your property is the final piece. I looked at the documents. I did not touch them. Sellers Woodworks is not for sale. Preston smiled patiently, as though speaking to a child who did not understand money. Stanley, be reasonable. You're 71. You aren't working anymore. That building is sitting there, falling apart and costing you taxes. We're offering a fair price. More than fair. I still use that shop. For what? A hobby? He tapped the documents. This is real money. Enough to make your retirement comfortable. Frankly, it would make things easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. There it was. In that moment, I understood why I had been invited. I had not been invited because they wanted me to watch my granddaughter get married. They needed me to sit still long enough for somebody to place a pen in my hand. I looked at Preston's smooth, waiting expression. Then I looked beyond him toward the head table, where Chloe was taking her seat in her white dress. That workshop is not for sale, Preston. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. Not today. Not at my granddaughter's wedding. Preston's smile remained, but his eyes changed. They became cold. He leaned back and allowed the silence to stretch the way lawyers do when they want someone to feel the weight of what they are facing. Stanley, he said softly, let me make the situation clear. He looked toward Chloe and then back at me. Marilyn and I make the decisions about this family now. We decide who is part of Chloe's life. We decide who attends holidays. We'll decide who spends time with future grandchildren. My chest tightened. If you want to be difficult about land you barely use, Preston continued, then maybe Chloe will eventually understand why her grandfather isn't around very often. Things happen in families. People grow apart. It would be unfortunate, but it happens. He was using my granddaughter as leverage. Give away the workshop or lose Chloe. I studied the man in the $1,000 suit. A man who had never built anything with his own hands. A man who had never missed a meal. A man who believed a family was something that could be negotiated. Something changed inside me. It was a feeling I had not experienced in years. It was not anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. Cold and clear, like the first breath after reaching the surface of deep water. For 50 years, I had swallowed painful words. I had kept the peace. I had made myself small so the people I loved could feel larger. I called it love. Maybe some of it was. But sitting at that table beside the kitchen, being told I could purchase my granddaughter's affection with the deed to my life's work, something in my spine finally became straight. I said nothing to Preston. I only looked at him. Whatever he saw in my expression made him pause. Then a memory I had been chasing all afternoon finally reached me. It returned all at once, the way old memories sometimes do. The winter of 1997. The boy behind my workshop. He had been so thin. That was what I remembered first. Thin and watchful, like someone who had been hurt enough times to expect it from everyone. He would not tell me where he came from. For a long time, he would not give me his last name, only his first. Julian. I fed him. When the weather became too cold, I gave him a corner of the workshop where he could sleep. I told Ruth that he was an apprentice, so she would not worry. I placed a chisel in his hand and taught him how to make something true from a rough piece of wood. He possessed a hunger I had never seen before or since. Not a hunger for money. A hunger for proof. Proof that he mattered. Proof that he was capable of creating something good. After I locked the workshop, he often stayed beneath a single light, practicing until he could make a perfect dovetail joint. Why do you help me? He asked once. You don't even know me. I gave him the same answer my father once gave me. A man's value is not determined by where he comes from. It is determined by what he does with his hands and whether he keeps his word. Julian stayed for 4 years. He became stronger. He became proud in the right way. Then one spring, he told me he planned to go to the city and make something of himself. He shook my hand. Then he was gone. I never learned where he ended up. I hoped he was safe. I hoped the world had become kinder than it had been before he found my door. I sat at table 12 with a stack of purchase papers in front of me and thought about that boy for the first time in years. Julian. And somewhere in the same building was a man named Julian Vance. A spoon touched a glass. The ballroom became quiet. Preston stood, gathered the purchase documents into the leather folder, and returned to the head table to give a speech. He accepted the microphone like a man who had waited all evening for the moment. Friends, family, distinguished guests. He nodded toward the Ashford side of the ballroom. What a joy it is to celebrate Chloe today. People applauded politely. He waited for the sound to fade. Family is everything, Preston continued. And I want to say something about my wife, Marilyn, Chloe's mother. He smiled down at her. Marilyn built herself into a remarkable woman. She came from very humble beginnings. There was a deliberate pause. We do not choose where we come from, but we do choose where we are going. Soft laughter moved among the Ashford tables. Knowing laughter, the kind of laughter that has a target. Humble beginnings. He meant me. He meant the workshop, the sawdust, the old truck outside. He stood before 200 people and turned my life into a joke while smiling. I remained beside the kitchen and listened as strangers laughed at the embarrassment of coming from someone like me. Marilyn did not look in my direction. She watched Preston, smiling and nodding. My own daughter was agreeing that where she came from was something she needed to apologize for. I looked at my scarred hands resting on the white tablecloth. Those hands had held Marilyn on the day she was born. Those hands had built the bed where she slept as a child. Humble beginnings. I no longer felt small. That was the strange thing. Somewhere between the purchase documents and Preston's speech, the smallness had burned away. What remained was resolve. I was ready. The speech ended. The band began playing. People stood and moved around the ballroom. During the distraction, Chloe left the head table. I watched her scan the room. She was looking for someone. Then, she walked past the family tables and the dance floor. She came toward the back, toward me. When she reached table 12, she stopped. She looked at the kitchen doors, the waiters resting during their break, the coat check woman. Then she looked at me, sitting among them in my gray suit. Grandpa? Her voice broke. Why are you sitting back here? It's fine, sweetheart. It is not fine. Her cheeks became red. Who put you here? Did Mom do this? She began turning toward the other side of the ballroom, her hands tightening. This is my wedding. I'm going to talk to Mom. I reached for her hand. Chloe. She turned back. Look at me. She did. Not today, I said gently. This is your day. It is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Don't allow anyone to turn it into an argument. Not even me. Her eyes filled with tears. But it's wrong. It's so wrong, Grandpa. I know. I squeezed her hand. But you will not repair it by creating a scene in your wedding dress. Trust me. Some things have a way of revealing themselves. Chloe lowered herself beside my chair, without caring about her dress. Then she hugged me. I held my granddaughter, and for a moment, the ballroom disappeared. I love you, she whispered. You aren't a burden. You have never been a burden. Either she had heard what Marilyn said, or she had understood it on her own. Her words broke my heart and repaired part of it during the same breath. That was when the atmosphere in the ballroom changed. A murmur rose near the entrance. People turned. Someone important had arrived. He stood in the doorway as though the building had been designed to frame him. Tall. In his early 40s, yet the responsibility he carried made him appear older. He wore a charcoal suit, tailored specifically for him. A few strands of gray touched his temples. He did not hurry. Men like him rarely do. The staff reacted first. Sophia sat straighter. Marcus placed down his bread roll. Every waiter in the room corrected their posture. That's him, Sophia whispered. That's Mr. Vance. Julian Vance, the chief executive, the man who owned the vineyard, the resort, and everything around us. The nobody who had become somebody. At the family table, Preston noticed him and became excited. He took Marilyn's arm and stood. The Ashfords had been hoping for this moment all evening. The important man. The person they wanted to impress. But Julian Vance was not looking at them. He remained inside the entrance and allowed his eyes to travel slowly across the ballroom, table by table, face by face. He looked like a man searching for one specific person in a crowd of strangers. There was something in his expression I could not understand from that distance. It was not the polite boredom of a wealthy executive attending another event. It was something tighter, older, almost nervous. Chloe remained beside my chair and turned toward him. Who was that? The owner, I told her, of all this. Sophia leaned closer. They said his office called this morning and requested tonight's guest list. Nobody understood why. She shook her head. He has never done that before. Julian's eyes moved past the head table without stopping. They passed the Ashfords, who were nearly waving for his attention. They moved across the dance floor. Then his gaze reached the back of the room. The kitchen doors. Table 12. His eyes found me. Then they stopped. Everything in his expression changed. Whatever he had been searching for, he had found it. And it was sitting 6 feet from the kitchen, in a pressed gray suit, holding his granddaughter's hand. Preston did not notice where Julian was looking. He was already moving across the ballroom with Marilyn beside him. His hand was extended. His smile was as wide as he could make it. Mr. Vance, Preston Ashford, it is an honor to have you here. Julian turned toward him slowly, the way someone turns away from something important, toward something that is not. He briefly shook Preston's hand. Mr. Ashford, he said, polite but cool. His attention was already returning toward the back of the ballroom. We're thrilled you could attend, Marilyn added. Truly. If there is anything you need... Actually, Julian said, there is something. He searched the tables again. I'm looking for someone. I was told a Mr. Sellers would be here today. Stanley Sellers. From across the ballroom, I watched the color leave my daughter's face. Marilyn opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Sellers? That's my father, but he's just... She stopped herself. He isn't really part of the... Where is he? Julian asked. His voice remained polite, but there was something firm beneath it. Preston recovered first. His instincts returned, although he appeared genuinely confused. Stanley? You're looking for Stanley? I don't understand the... Where is he? Julian repeated. This time, it was not a question. Marilyn slowly raised one trembling hand. She pointed toward the back, toward the kitchen, toward table 12. The ballroom became silent. The band stopped playing. 200 guests stopped speaking. Some held forks in the air. Others held drinks halfway to their mouths. Everyone watched the most powerful man in the building ask for someone whose name meant nothing to them. Julian Vance turned toward me. Then he began walking. He did not approach the head table. He did not move toward the Ashfords with their wealth and expectant smiles. He walked toward the kitchen. His shoes touched the polished floor, and every step could be heard in the silence. Step after step, 200 heads turned to follow him. Everyone watched the slow, deliberate path of the owner as they wondered where he was going. He was walking toward the back, toward the staff table, toward the one person everyone had spent the evening pretending not to see. Marilyn hurried after him. Mr. Vance, I don't think my father he isn't. You don't have to. Julian did not slow down. He did not turn his head. Beside me, Chloe rose while keeping her hand in mine. Her eyes were wide. Sophia, Marcus, and Dolores became still. Everyone at table 12 held their breath. I placed my hands flat on the white tablecloth and watched the stranger approach. My heart was pounding, not from fear, from something closer to recognition. The nearer he came, the more his face reached into my memories. The years began rearranging themselves. The eyes, I knew those eyes. I had seen them younger, hungrier, watching my hands while I demonstrated how to build a joint strong enough to last a century. He crossed the final few feet. The ballroom was so quiet that I heard the kitchen doors settle against their hinges. Julian Vance stopped in front of table 12. He looked down at me. Then all the strength and composure of the executive disappeared. His eyes became wet. Mr. Sellers. His voice broke on my name. Mr. Sellers, he repeated. You don't recognize me, do you? I studied his face. I searched beyond the expensive suit, beyond the years of success, beyond 28 years of time. Then I saw the boy. Julian, I whispered. Something moved through his entire body when I said the name. Relief. Grief. 28 years of emotion. Then, in front of 200 people, Julian Vance did something nobody expected. He lowered himself. The owner of hotels and vineyards bent before an old man seated beside the kitchen. He took my hand between both of his. Then he bowed his head over it. A single sound moved through the ballroom as everyone drew in the same breath. I was the boy you fed, Julian said. His voice was loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear, but it was thick with emotion. When I had nothing, when I slept behind your workshop during the winter, you didn't ask questions. You left the door unlocked and placed food on the workbench. I could not answer. My throat had closed. You placed a chisel in my hand, he continued. You taught me a trade. You taught me that I mattered when nobody else believed I did. He lifted his head. Tears moved freely down his face. He made no attempt to hide them. You gave me a reason to keep moving forward, Mr. Sellers. I owe you everything I have, everything I became. Silence. Complete silence. I looked beyond Julian's shoulder. Marilyn stood frozen, almost as pale as Chloe's wedding dress. One hand covered her mouth. Preston's face had turned gray. The Ashfords stared as though they had forgotten how to breathe. 200 guests who had watched me be sent toward the kitchen were now watching the most powerful person among them lower himself before me. Julian stood, but he kept my hand in his. Then he turned toward the ballroom and raised his voice. Some of you do not know who this man is, he said. Let me tell you. Nobody moved. 28 years ago, I was a homeless 16-year-old. I was hurt, hungry, and sleeping behind a workshop in a town most of you have never heard of. Everyone had stopped believing in me. I had stopped believing in myself. He looked down at me. Then he faced the guests again. This man found me. He didn't call authorities. He didn't send me away. He gave me food. He gave me shelter. Then he gave me something more valuable than either of those things. Julian's voice became stronger. He gave me a trade. He gave me dignity. Everyone remained silent. Everything I owned began inside that man's workshop. Every building carrying my name, every dollar. All of it began because an old carpenter decided a forgotten boy was worth teaching. He looked at me. His name is Stanley Sellers. Then his voice softened. I left without giving him a proper goodbye. I was too proud and too ashamed of where I came from to return before I had made something of myself. Then, the years disappeared, the way years do. He shook his head. This morning my office sent me the guest list, as they do for every event. I saw the name Sellers. After 28 years, that name appeared inside my own building. He looked around the ballroom. I cleared my entire schedule. I had to know whether it was really him. Then Julian's attention moved toward the leather folder resting beside my chair. The purchase documents were partly visible. He had noticed them the moment he reached table 12. And that workshop, Julian said quietly, is worth more than any building I own. I would think very carefully before trying to place a price on it. He looked directly at Preston, especially today, during this man's granddaughter's wedding. Preston's expression collapsed. He quickly closed the folder. It was too late. Everyone had already seen it. That is a private family matter, Preston said. It stopped being private, Julian replied, the moment you seated him beside the kitchen. Every person in the ballroom turned toward Preston. 200 people understood at the same moment. Julian faced me again and offered his arm. Mr. Sellers, you do not belong at this table. Come with me. I stood slowly. My knees were stiff. Julian looked at me as though I were made from something valuable. Then he walked beside me across the ballroom, past every staring guest, straight toward the head table, the table where my family had decided I did not belong. Make room, Julian told a server. Set a proper place. Use the best you have. This man sits at the front. The staff moved immediately. A chair appeared beside Chloe. Fresh linen was placed on the table. Real silverware. A glass of wine was poured before I sat. The Ashfords, who had laughed at my humble beginnings 20 minutes earlier, stood silently and avoided my eyes. Preston lowered himself into a chair. The leather folder remained on the table like something nobody wanted to touch. Marilyn stood motionless. My daughter watched the most important man in her world honor the father she had hidden. She could not speak. Before sitting, I turned toward Julian and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You do not owe me anything, son," I said quietly, only for him. "Do you understand? Not one thing. You lived your life. You did the work. I only opened a door." His jaw trembled. "You opened the only door that had ever been opened to me, and you repaid it by walking through that door and creating something good." I touched his shoulder. "That is all a man like me ever wants, to watch one of his boys stand straight." Julian could not answer. He nodded and held my hand once more. Then I turned toward my daughter. The ballroom became quiet again. Everyone understood that I had something to say. I did not raise my voice. I had never needed to. I looked at Marilyn. Then I looked at Preston. I want everyone to hear this. Not because I am angry, because it is true. The room became still. I don't need a chair at an expensive table. I have eaten perfectly well at plain tables throughout my life. Ask the good people beside the kitchen. They know how to treat another person. I turned toward Marilyn. What I needed was for you to see me. That was all. Not as a rich man, not as an important man, only as your father. The father who loved you enough to work 3 jobs so you would never go without. Tears ran down her face. She opened her mouth but could not speak. You called me a burden today. I allowed the words to remain in the silence. I carried you before you could walk. I carried this family for 50 years. I never called any of it a burden. I looked directly at her. I called it my life. I lifted the leather folder so everyone could see it. Then I placed it back on the table without opening it. The workshop is not for sale. Not to you, Preston. Not to anyone. I looked around the ballroom. Beginning Monday, I'm turning it into a trade school. It will be free for boys and girls who have nothing except a pair of hands and nobody willing to believe in them. I looked toward Julian. The way someone once had nothing and found an open door. The applause began at table 12. Sophia stood first. Then Marcus. Then Dolores. The sound moved from one table to another until nearly the entire ballroom was standing. Everyone except Marilyn and Preston. Then Chloe rose from the head table. Everyone watched. She approached me in her wedding dress and took my hand in front of every guest, including her mother. My grandfather made something for me, she said clearly. He made me a wedding gift with his own hands. Somebody placed it in a storage room because they said it didn't match the decorations. She turned toward one of the servers. Please bring it out. Right now. Marilyn stepped forward. Chloe, sweetheart, this isn't the time. It is the time, Mom. Chloe's voice remained steady. This is exactly the time. 2 servers carried the black walnut chest into the ballroom. They placed it on a table at the center of the floor, where everyone could see it. The walnut glowed beneath the chandeliers. Chloe's carved name caught the light. A murmur moved among the guests. Even the Ashfords leaned forward. It's beautiful, someone whispered. My grandfather made it by hand, Chloe told them, holding her head high. It is the most beautiful thing anyone gave me today, and somebody left it on the floor. She knelt beside the chest and moved her fingers across the letters of her name. Then she looked toward me. Can we open it together, Grandpa? My throat was too tight for words. I nodded. Chloe lifted the lid. The hinges I had fitted moved silently, smooth, exactly the way I had designed them. Then Chloe became very still. A hope chest should have contained empty space, waiting for a young bride's memories. But this one was already filled. She reached inside and lifted the first object. The moment she recognized it, one hand covered her mouth. Across the ballroom, Marilyn made a sound as though something inside her had broken. It was a photograph. Marilyn, at 4 years old. She was sitting on my workbench in a pile of sawdust, laughing with her entire face. Both hands were filled with wood shavings. Ruth had taken the picture. I had carried it in my wallet for years. Later, I placed it inside a frame. During the weeks before the wedding, I put it inside Chloe's chest. Chloe held up the photograph. That's you, Mom, she said quietly. That's you inside Grandpa's workshop. Marilyn stared at the image and did not move. Chloe reached inside again. She removed a tiny pair of wooden-soled shoes. They were the first thing I had ever made for a child. Your baby shoes, Chloe read from the tag written in my handwriting. Made by Dad, first pair. Then she found an old letter. The paper had yellowed with time and had been folded into thirds. Chloe opened it. This is addressed to me, she said, her voice shaking. It is dated the day I was born. Then she read it aloud. The letter was not long. It was the promise of an old man to the granddaughter he had just met. I promised that she would always have a place with me, that my door would always remain open, that my hands would always be ready to build whatever she needed. I told her that where she came from was nothing to be ashamed of, that working hands were honest hands. By the time Chloe finished reading, half the ballroom was crying. The Ashford tables remained completely silent. There was no money inside the chest, no official documents, no proof of value in the way the world usually measures value. Only a lifetime of love, quietly saved and waiting to be opened. Chloe pressed the letter against her chest and looked toward her mother. Marilyn had spent the entire day preventing people from seeing where she came from. Now she was looking at a photograph of herself at 4 years old, covered in sawdust and happier than she had looked in 20 years. Marilyn slowly crossed the ballroom. She stopped in front of me, Her makeup had been ruined by tears. Standing close, she looked less like the polished woman from table 1 and more like the little girl in the photograph. Dad. Her voice was barely audible. I don't know how to. She stopped. Then she began again. I was ashamed. She shook her head. Not of you. That's the terrible part. She looked at the photograph. I was ashamed of myself, of where I started. Every time I looked at you, I saw the truck, the sawdust, the girl who grew up without money. She cried openly, in front of the Ashfords, in front of everyone. The careful image she had spent years protecting finally disappeared. So I hid you, she said. I hid the best part of where I came from because I was too afraid to be proud of it. She lowered her head. I gave away the best thing I had while trying to impress people who don't even matter. Behind her, Preston gathered his folder. Without looking at anyone, he began walking toward the exit. As he passed the center table, Chloe reached toward the purchase agreement and deliberately tore it in half. The pieces fell to the floor. Nobody tried to stop Preston from leaving. Nobody said goodbye. I studied my daughter's tearful but honest face. 50 years of things I could have said rose inside me. I allowed most of them to go. I know what shame does, Marilyn, I said. It makes a person small while wearing a nicer suit. I watched it consume you for years. I stayed silent because I did not want to lose you. I took her hand. But I will not be hidden again. Not by anyone. Not even you. She nodded as tears continued down her face. You shouldn't have to be. Later, the music began again. The ballroom slowly became a wedding once more. Julian pulled a chair beside me at the head table. I meant what I said, he told me. About the workshop. About owing you. I began to interrupt. Don't stop me this time, he said. Please let me finish. Then he smiled. You said you want to turn the workshop into a free school for young people who have nothing. Stanley, allow me to fund it properly. Real equipment, a proper building. Salary so the school will continue beyond both of us. I began shaking my head out of habit. This isn't charity, Julian said quickly. It is an investment in more young people like the one you helped. Call it the Seller's Workshop. Put your name on it. Allow it to do for 100 children what you did for me. I looked at the successful man beside me. Then I saw the boy I once fed during a cold winter. He was offering to turn my life's dream into something permanent. All right, I said, but there will be conditions. Julian smiled. Every student learns for free. Nobody is refused because of where they came from, and the door remains unlocked. Julian laughed through wet eyes. Agreed. Every condition? Everyone. He shook my hand the way I had taught him. Firm, honest, looking another person directly in the eye. Marilyn stood nearby. She watched us, but seemed uncertain about where she belonged. I turned toward her. You want to be part of this family? You are welcome. She looked at me. My door remains open, Marilyn. It always has. But you walk through it as my equal, or you don't walk through it at all. No more shame. No more hiding. That is the price. She wiped her face and nodded. That is a fair price. It is the only one I have. Across the ballroom, Chloe danced with her new husband. Every few moments, she looked toward us. She watched her family slowly begin repairing itself at the head table, where it should have been from the beginning. That happened last spring. The Seller's Workshop opened during the fall. Julian kept his promise. He did more than keep it. Where the old workshop stood, there is now a bright, warm building filled with rows of workbenches and high-quality tools. Above the entrance is a sign my late wife would have loved. We had 11 students in our first class. One girl had been forced from her home. One boy struggled to read until we began measuring pieces of wood together. They were young people the world had already stopped believing in. I arrive every morning by 7. My hands are not as steady as they used to be. These days, I mostly teach. I walk between the benches and show students how to read wood grain, how to stand with confidence, how to create something true from a rough board. Julian visits whenever he can. He removes his jacket, rolls up his sleeves, and works beside the students. None of them believe he owns half the county until somebody tells them. He prefers it that way. Marilyn visits on Sundays. Our relationship recovered slowly, carefully. There were many quiet cups of coffee at my kitchen table, many conversations that should have happened years earlier. She is different now, smaller in a good way. The way people become when they stop pretending. She brought me the photograph from Chloe's chest. She placed it inside a frame. The picture of Marilyn and me, surrounded by sawdust, now sits on my workbench. Preston is no longer part of her life. That matter belongs to them. She does not discuss it, and I do not ask. Chloe visits during most weekends with her husband. She keeps the black walnut chest at the foot of their bed. She told me it is the only wedding gift she still thinks about every day. The workshop door remains unlocked, always, just in case another young person with nowhere to go needs a place where they can become somebody. Sometimes, when the workshop is quiet and the students have gone home, I remember the wedding. I remember sitting at table 12, convinced that somebody had finally put me in my place. I believed an old man's value could be measured by the chair somebody assigned him. I had everything backward. They placed me at the staff table. They hid me beside the kitchen, among the people who carried trays, checked coats, washed dishes, and performed honest work nobody remembered to thank them for. It became the best seat in the ballroom. Sitting among working people reminded me exactly who I was. I was not the man the Ashfords laughed at. I was not the burden my daughter tried to hide. I was the man who left a door unlocked during one cold winter without knowing that an entire life would be built on the other side. A person's value was never determined by where they sat. It was determined by what they gave when nobody was watching. A sandwich left on a workbench, a chisel placed into a young hand, a name carved deeply into good wood. Yesterday another student arrived. He was 14, angry, and unwilling to say much. He would not tell anyone where he came from. He remained near the workshop entrance, as though deciding whether to leave. I did not ask questions. I placed a chisel in his hand and showed him how to hold it. His shoulders relaxed slightly. He made his first cut. It was crooked. Then he looked at me and waited, expecting criticism. Good, I told him. Now, do it again. He tried a second time. I watched a boy the world had forgotten begin, very slowly, to stand straight. That is my story. My family called me a burden and hid me beside the kitchen. Instead, it became the day I finally remembered how to stand straight. And if the people you love have ever made you feel invisible, remember something an old carpenter had to learn the difficult way. Your value was never theirs to decide.